for this moment. We have a full agenda to share with you and updates on what's happening and a bunch of new issues that are coming up. So we'll go through the agenda step by step and be done in an hour and a half. So thank you for joining. These issues remain top of mind even as we struggle with COVID. So I'll bring it back to Bruce to lead us for the first item on the agenda.
Thanks, David. It's actually 2.5 hours. We're going till noon. So
sorry, my bad.
Everyone. Right. Glad that you're with us. We're going to do some news, some quick hits on news and where you can find more information. And David and I will tag team on Sacramento. AB 26, there were a number of bills in the legislature earlier this year around climate, and there was a big proposal for a climate resilience bond. Much of that was axed when the pandemic hit. But there are still some bills of interest to you that are moving, and here are a couple of them. AB 2621 is in the Senate now, so it's passed through the Assembly. It would mandate that regions create regional adaptation plans. And it gives the Office of Planning and Research, Governor's Office, about a year to sketch out all the guidelines of how those plans would be put together. A small group of us have been working with legislative staff on this to insert more than just plans and planning, but actual climate services, science assistance, technical assistance. So right now the bill has some of that in there, and we'll watch that one for you. AB 2371, David, that's you.
Yeah, that's another bill that has made it through the Assembly, is currently being considered in the Senate. There are amendments pending. It was a bill that at its heart, sponsored by Friedman, created a scientist panel to provide advice to the state on adaptation project prioritization and identification, a science advisory team. We made some recommendations that be fleshed out a little bit more and a little bit more deeply. And by the way, I should apologize. I cannot turn on my camera. I want to, but it's not being detected. So sorry for remaining in the dark here. In the Senate right now, there are amendments pending that would add practitioners to the science advisory team, which was one of our recommendations, because we want it to be very clear what actionable information is as distinguished from, pure science, and we think that will help with that. The bill now is providing advice on adaptation to ICARP, the OPR, Office of Planning and Research's main advisory body on climate adaptation. It would improve the mandate, and these are all recommendations along our lines, to engage locally with decision makers, call out extreme heat, and then connect to safeguarding reports that are occurring. So I haven't seen it in the current version yet, but there's some improvements that are pending on 2371. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, David. The climate resilience bond was a big $6 or $7 billion, depend on which version you were looking at, House and Senate and administration, for climate resilience, and it's now been retitled as economic recovery and climate resilience and all. The administration pulled their support for it, but we have been told that it's still somewhat alive, and I'm hoping to get a text while we're having this meeting this morning to either confirm or deny that the climate bond may be done at this point.
Hi, is this Corinne?
Hello? Please mute your phones, folks. There are a couple of people that haven't muted their computers or their phones. We would appreciate it. Thank you. So that's the legislation in Sacramento. Quickly, you can Google any of those, 2621 or 2371, or the Climate Resilience Bond, which was AB 3256. DC, there's actually some hope from our nation's capital. The House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis issued a big 500+ page report on their plan for dealing with climate if we get a new administration and changes in Congress next year. And it's interesting. They're big, long chapters, including there's a good 40 or 50 page chunk on adaptation. Yeshi, you can Google that one, House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. Kathy Castor from Florida is the chair of that committee. Yeshi will put into the chat function a reference to a Vox article that I think you might enjoy, looking at different behind the scenes plays that are being made by various groups within the Democratic Party, again, with this assumption that we could move on climate next year if there's a change from the election in November. And it's an interesting article to see behind the scenes how the different factions in the party are starting to come together around rather bold climate issues. And you might have seen also that Biden put out a big jobs and climate plan yesterday. Those are all Googleable. Next is Bay Area. You can put questions about any of those in the chat function. We'll try and answer them later. But let's do Bay Area, and Yeshi is going to bring us up to date on the Equity Working Group.
Thanks, Bruce. Hi, everybody. It's really good to see your faces for those of you who have video on. It's great to do a regional meeting virtually and be able to still do the work we do normally, but just online. Yeah, so I just wanted to update you all. We completed a first successful year of the Equity Working Group. You may remember just a year ago we launched, and the year has already gone by, and we met bi-monthly for the past year, and we learned a lot from one another, collaborating and supporting each other on projects, and also learning best practices through presentations from key leaders in the field. The year culminated with a training that we offered back in June for BayCAN members at large, as well as the Equity Work Group. And we even had some people tuning in from regional collaboratives across the state. And Phoenix, Nahal, and I developed a curriculum tailored specifically for our people, which focused largely on how to operationalize equity through community-driven planning. And during the discussion section later on that I'll be leading, I know we'd love to hear from members who have any key takeaways from the training. Another update is we have the Equity Resources Toolkit coming out in just a couple weeks, something we've been collaborating on with many Equity Work Group members, and provides a guide that walks you through the best practices and tools and resources for doing equitable adaptation work. Stay tuned for that soon. And finally, we're beginning year 2 of the Equity Working Group in late August and early September, so not long from now. And this would actually be the perfect moment for folks who have been wanting to get involved with the Equity Working Group, but not knowing how to jump in. Now is the moment. We're starting our next year. We're going to be doing some goal setting and reorientation for the next year's work plan. And to say that one of our most exciting announcements is one of our first meetings will be co-hosting. We're excited to announce that we just decided to co-host a training with Bar High on their brand new community engagement toolkit that I don't even know if they've published it yet, but they're going to pilot their very first training with us through the Equity Working Group. So if you're interested in that, you can absolutely join us. And please feel free to reach out to me to join the working group for any more information on any of the things I just listed. And you can also check out our website on the Equity Working Group page. We have all of the meeting recordings and resources we've developed over the past year. So more to come from us in the future, but that's the update from year 1 of the Equity Working Group.
Great, thanks, Yeshi, and great work by the EWG. I'll take the next couple of them. We put out about a month or 2 ago the BayCAN Project Matrix. It's on our website. It has short versions and outlines of about 200 projects that you all are doing, our 42 BayCAN members. Interesting stuff, some great work being done, and I urge you to look. We've updated the website and the project matrix is there. Webinars, our last webinar was in June on the 22nd, and we looked at the fire season and the PSPS, COVID, and microgrids. We had a very interesting webinar. Again, the link to that and all of our work that we've done over the last months is on the BayCAN website. So you can find the link there to the June 22nd webinar. Our next webinar, our August one, is going to be in late August. We're just fixing the date. We'll send it to you in a couple of days. It's going to be about aligning plans. We've had a lot of interest in this topic of how do I put a local hazard mitigation plan and a general plan safety element and maybe a climate action plan and maybe a local coastal program. How do I integrate those so I'm not doing 4 or 5 different planning processes for climate adaptation? We're going to work on this tough subject on a webinar in late August, and we'll have information for you. Next, Estuary News has put out a 36-page fabulous special edition on projects around the Bay, and Ariel is with us and can you do a couple of minutes to tell people about the special issue?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for helping us do this great issue. I don't know if anybody saw the actual paper copy, which is so much more fun to look at than the PDF. So if any of you would like us to send you a hard copy, please tell Bruce. We're happy to mail it to your home address. So the special issue covered adaptation activities in 12 different counties in Estuary News, and we distributed it to 5,000 people on our mailing list, including all the electeds and people who run agency departments, and we've had very good response so far. I wanted to tell you that in the future, our team is going to be doing a couple of updates. So if any of you have some new news, some report that has been stalled because of COVID, but you're about to release it, we'd like to know about it so that we can keep updating the news through our other news channels, and then send people back to the big issues so that they can see all the things that you're doing, and we keep reminding them. I also hope that you're sharing the issue with your communications staff if they have any availability to share things. I understand everybody's pretty impacted by COVID. The main response I've gotten from the people that I've heard from are that they're very happy to see so much in one place, so much regional information in one place, or local information in a regional context. Going forward, I just wanted to tell you that we're planning to dedicate one story per issue. We come out quarterly to adaptation, so we can continue the theme of what are municipalities doing about adaptation. So I want Bruce to work with you guys to figure out how you can regularly communicate with us on story ideas. Either I can come to a meeting once every quarter and we can have a moment where we brainstorm what we might cover, or we can have a little advisory board that works with us regularly, like your equity group that's interested in communications. So if anybody wants to contact us or contact me, you can always email estuaryeditor@gmail.com. And Bruce can put you in touch with me, and I'll do a little follow-up with him about contacts and these items so that he can remind you to talk to us about what the news is. But I thank you very much for your time and for allowing us to do such a great issue. Thanks.
Well, and thank you for all the work, and thank you to BayCAN members, a number of you that worked with Ariel and her staff to get projects, great projects, into this special issue. California Resilience Challenge is something that you probably saw last year that was kicked off by Bay Area Council and some other groups. It was a statewide challenge with money as the incentive to fund, they thought, 10 or 12 adaptation projects and resilience projects in the state. And they've announced the winners, and we have 2 in the Bay Area in our 9-county region. There's one on groundwater and sea level rise that'll be about research around that big and important topic of how groundwater is being affected by sea level rise and all, and how the two interact. It's called Keeping Groundwater at Bay. And that's one. The second one in our area is called Transforming Schools into Resilience Centers. And it's with the San Carlos School District on the peninsula and CCAG of San Mateo. And it's looking at physical improvements to a school site, in this case, in terms of making it more resilient to extreme storms and other types of climate impacts. So we have 2 winners in this hopefully first round of the California Resilience Challenge. Finally, in the news from the Bay Area, you may have seen that the draft is out for Plan Bay Area 2050, the blueprint. And this is strategies, about 25 strategies for our region, covering transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment. And the environment includes climate, and it includes some proposals on sea level rise and on fires in particular. So well worth looking at. They've just started, or they're just starting tonight actually, a series of virtual workshops where the public can weigh in on the draft. There's one for Napa County, I think tonight. They're going county by county. And there's one for Marin, it looks like, on Saturday. But you can find the whole thing if you go to planbayarea.org. All the information is there on the draft and on the workshops and a town hall and on submitting written comments through a survey. It's a big plan. It's a very important plan for the region. And it now, this time around, includes some good chunks on climate resilience and climate impacts. So that's our news from here and far. And we're on to the next item on our agenda. I'll show you where we are with the agenda. We've done 1 and 2. We're now going to look at sea level rise and have dual presentations. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so David Bihar can share his and kick us off. David,
okay.
It's all yours.
Yeah, all mine. And here I go, finding that. Sorry, hold on. Share. Take a second.
If you were, please be on mute. We hear typing in the background and we know you all are busy, but please don't type audibly so we can have a quiet session. There you are, David.
Am I shared?
Yep.
Okay, good. So assessment to adaptation. We've been talking about this work group for a while. It's kind of part of a national phenomenon wherein people are starting to talk about how to make the transition from vulnerability assessment to adaptation planning. We know a lot of folks who are working on this, on sea level rise and other subjects. And we'll hear from Jessica from BCDC afterward about the effort of BayAdapt that's part of the same kind of dynamic that's going on. This is the kind of the milestones in the creation of this work group. This is the second work group BayCAN has created alongside the equity work group that Yeshi just reported on. And it was really requested at the sub-regional meetings we had in the fall of 2019, announced. We solicited memberships or volunteers to join the committee at the regional meeting in February. We got 22 folks joining the committee. I think it's gotten a little bigger since then. We've had a visioning and writing process with these folks right here who led us. We developed a foundational document that I'm going to cite with these folks who helped lead us. We've had 2 A-to-A work group meetings, one in May, one in June. And we launched some research subgroups that'll focus on in May to get the ball rolling. Let's see, I'm not even in the thing here. Where's my anime? There we go. So these are this is the remit of the A-to-A work group. The focus is on sea level rise, though we think we have the ability to potentially learn some lessons about that transition from sea level rise that will apply to other subjects in the climate adaptation space. The vision is to ensure that this difficult process related to adaptation itself, which has the potential to be expensive, socially disruptive, institutionally challenging, and unjustly implemented, is instead an opportunity to do good things on climate adaptation and potentially have spin-off effects that are positive. Not to be political or anything, but Joe Biden yesterday said that to him, climate change means jobs. And, my mayors have said the same thing over time. And so there's ways to do adaptation that are positive and not negative, and that's the direction we want to go. The early work in the A2A work group has zeroed in on these five things, and these three in particular that are from the foundational document that we developed as a group: identifying challenges, knowledge development, learning, collaborating, sharing, framing communication and messaging, and then advancing topics through appropriate channels that we can make connections to. EWG in terms of internally, which we've done, BayAdapt externally, and internally both really, that you're going to hear more about today and after this presentation. And are there other dynamics that we should approach, workshops, white papers, et cetera, that can advance this practice and our understanding of the nature of this challenge? The first thing we went into by consensus was kind of a knowledge development phase, where we came up with a list of subject matter that doesn't necessarily go to the process of adaptation, but to the specific challenges and knowledge that we need to execute an adaptation plan, to go from vulnerability assessment to adaptation. And we brainstormed these, and we've been working on this for a couple of months now. Science, meaning observations and projections, also emissions and uncertainties, decision-making under deep uncertainty, methods. We've heard a lot of talk about adaptation pathways. That's a DMDU method, but there are many others, and getting smart about how to use those is kind of an essential part of adaptation. Engineering state of knowledge. What do we know about green and gray infrastructure? What do we still need to know? Permitting processes and barriers. We know that's a big part of how this work is going to manifest at the local level, is getting permits for it. And what are the unique challenges in that area for adaptation? Communications, talking about adaptation with the public, with communities, et cetera. Costing and funding. How much is adaptation going to cost? And where are we going to get the funding? Two very different subjects that we're taking on in that particular subgroup. Governance. What does the collaborative infrastructure look like across the 100 and some odd jurisdictions that have a shoreline on the bay or the open coast? Then there's two cross-cutting issues: equitable adaptation, which, consistent with the approach as outlined quite clearly in all of the work of the EWG over the last year, needs to be part of every phase and every element of the adaptation challenge. And then providing input into the development of an adaptation guidance process that BCDC has been leading, Jackie Mendosky in particular, and Dana Breckwald as well. That's a document that was underway a little bit when we got going, but is still very much an open process. And Jackie has been an active part of the A2A work group that has allowed for lots of give and take in terms of what should be included in that guidance. I think the guidance from my perspective is substantially non-overlapping with all this stuff up here. I don't know if you can see my height. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Anyway, it's substantially non-overlapping, which is interesting because I think we can then add to what the adaptation guidance, which is really coming together nicely, can do to help us think through this as a community. Next steps being considered. So first of all, the research reports, we're trying to make them short and pithy. The goal was 3 pages each. They're of course going into the 5- and 6-page range, but with abstracts and bibliographies for further reading. That's where the research reports are, and we want to finish those and we want to share them. We didn't send out the 30 pages that we have right now produced because they're not ready for that, but at some point they will be, and I think they'll be really useful, at least a building block, the way we're looking at it, for understanding this challenge and in all of its specificity. Can we connect knowledge across subgroups? For example, I'm leading the science subgroup, and the way the science is pointing to different kinds of potential futures, particularly in the longer term, has a direct impact on the kind of costing that we think adaptation will involve and potentially the funding. As we look at the engineering state of knowledge, green versus gray, that's going to be a critical area where we might want to link up to the process for communicating the kinds of solutions that we're looking at with the communities that are obviously going to be impacted heavily by those solutions. Decision-making under deep uncertainty is an approach that allows for consideration of wide ranges of futures. How does that work in the permitting environment? How do you get a permit for a selection of options in the future that you're not prepared to pick at this early stage because we don't know where the future is going to lie? Those kinds of things we're going to look at exploring how we can do. Connecting. Case studies, where is the transition from assessment to adaptation actually occurred and where has it worked really well? We've talked about this from the beginning. We've got some in the Bay Area, of course, and then we have others in other places in the country and even, well, state, country, and potentially even the world that we might learn from for this transition where adaptation is really happening on the ground. What kind of places should we be sharing information and advancing practical learning? Should we be doing a workshop, white papers, trainings, et cetera? Those are all up in the air. And then significantly, and leading into the next item, and I have a minute left for questions when I'm finished with this last bullet, advancing this collaboration through important regional processes, particularly the Bay Adapt process, which has a similar focus on sea level rise, and I think is doing a lot related to assessment adaptation as well. So that's my report. And before we go to Jessica Fain, Planning Director at BayCAN, are there any questions, comments, thoughts at all on this? Anybody who really wants to join the adaptation, assessment adaptation work group should do so and volunteer to do so. We can always use more bodies. Marcus, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I was just curious if you all had looked at AB 2800, the Climate Safe Infrastructure Report. I'm just looking at this engineering state of knowledge, and that's essentially kind of the state of knowledge for the state around adaptation planning.
Great idea. Nathan Bengston from PG&E is chairing that subcommittee. I don't have the other names in front of me, but that's a recommendation we should make to them.
I think they've already included it in there to some extent. I've looked through it, so just adding that. But good.
Look at them. Thank you. Other comments, thoughts, questions?
Okay, let's go to Jessica. David?
Yes, so Jessica Fain is the Planning Director at BCDC and leading the Bay Adapt process that many of us are participating in. I will unshare my screen so that Jessica can share hers and talk about Bay Adapt.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to try to get this, oops, loaded up here. Is that visible?
Looks good.
All right.
Yep.
So hi, everyone. Jessica Fain, Planning Director at BCDC, and I'm really happy to be here and share a little bit with you today on what's been going on in the Bay Adapt effort. We brought this before the BayCAN regional meeting back in February, and so I'm just going to provide an update on what we've been up to since February. Some of this may be a little redundant for those of you who have kind of been plugged in, but I think we have some new information to share as well before we delve into some breakout groups and discussions afterwards. So just to remind you and reorient you to what Bay Adapt is and what we're trying to do. At its core, we acknowledge that adapting to rising sea level will need to happen at the local level, whether it's changing land uses, reconstructing roads and infrastructure, working with communities, building up wetlands. And this is happening around the region, and many of you are leading those efforts. But we also know that local only adaptation will lead to suboptimal outcomes, both locally and regionally. This is because we live in this highly networked region where impacts in one area can have cascading impacts to another area. and may include things that we know, like disproportionate impacts to disadvantaged communities who may have fewer and financial or political resources, unintended flood impacts within a closed bay system, delay due to more pressing concerns like housing or transportation or a global pandemic, near-term loss of wetlands as the ecosystems most at risk of flooding, impacts to regional jobs and businesses, a lack of incentives to really solve common problems jointly across jurisdictions or across issue areas like multi-benefit solutions and nature-based solutions, and no real way to know as a region whether we're making collective progress or not. So the good news, we are not starting from scratch. Bay Area has been at this for quite some time. And so we have a lot to work, a great foundation to work from. And still there's a long way to go. And so despite pretty widespread agreement on the challenges, there's no clear agreement on the solutions. And there's no one agency or group that's really responsible for solving this problem. We each share a piece of the responsibility. So therefore, BCDC, together with a group of Bay Area leaders from regional agencies, NGOs, local governments, have come together to help develop BayAdapt. And BayAdapt is a short-term initiative to develop and adopt a regional consensus-driven strategy that lays out the actions necessary to adapt to the Bay Area to rising sea level and to protect its people and the natural and built environment. BayAdapt is largely comprised of three key elements. The first is the development of guiding principles that clearly state a set of shared beliefs and values to guide regional adaptation decisions, which are really the compass over the course of this process. We discussed these at the BayCAN meeting back in February and got some great feedback at our workshop we held. And so those guiding principles we're calling them draft guiding principles, but they're available on our website now. The second key element is what we're calling the joint platform. And this is the top 10 to 15 action items that the region must take to address sea level rise. And we really want to, this is kind of going to be the meat of what BayAdapt is. But perhaps even more importantly than what is written down in a report is number 3, which is to adopt the joint platform and commit together to implementing it through our respective roles and authorities and what we do to get those actions moving. Our timeline, it looks like we're in the middle. I would say we're still in the early middle. We spent most of 2019 kind of organizing and thinking about what is this thing. And the early part of this year, we really focused on those guiding principles. Right now, we're sort of in the meat of this joint platform development phase where we're brainstorming and thinking about what should and could be part of this joint platform. We have kind of a few different ways that we're engaging with folks to kind of figure this out. The first is through our leadership advisory group, LAG, which is comprised of about 30 Bay Area leaders in a range of different kind of sectors and perspectives. The second way is through a series of working groups, which are really getting more into the nitty-gritty on what those actions can be and are going to help us really flesh them out. And then finally, we are doing a series of public forums to kind of bring this to a broader audience and get feedback at critical points as well. We've also been spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to take a truly equity approach in BayAdapt and what that means for this process. At our last leadership advisory group meeting at the end of May, we spent the entire meeting on this topic of how to deepen equity in the BayAdapt process. For this, we've had the help and guidance of what we've dubbed the BayAdapt EJ Caucus, representatives from 4 community-based organizations around the Bay who are on the leadership advisory group. Phoenix Armenta from the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, and I don't know if Phoenix is on the call today, but if she is, just a shout out to her, provided us with kind of an equity analysis of what we had been kind of up to thus far and pointed out some of our shortcomings around language and outreach, structure, leadership training, long-term involvement of communities. And so we've really been taking those comments to heart and trying to figure out how we move forward with that. As a result, we're creating an equity tool to help ensure that we're embedding equity in sort of every part of this process, and prioritizing equity in the actions that go into the joint platform. We're also starting to work with the Exploratorium and a youth climate justice organization to explore how we can involve youth in this work, both in the short term, sort of as a pilot, and beyond, in terms of how we can kind of keep this work going beyond just the BayAdapt short-term process. We formally kicked off this work at a public workshop in April, which many of you, I think, attended. It was a virtual workshop. It was right when COVID sort of took us all home. And I think we benefited from that a little bit, in that we got over 200 people there, which we probably wouldn't have been able to do in person. And that was a really great session. There was a short panel featuring Liam Garland, then from Alameda, talking from a local government perspective, John Coleman from the Bay Planning Coalition, from an industry perspective, Melissa Jones from Bar High from a health equity perspective, and Mark Gold from the Ocean Protection Council from a statewide climate perspective. And this was still the era when Zoom breakout groups were still novel, and we polled people and did word clouds, and got some really great feedback from that process. Most recently, we've been busy hosting and organizing these 3 working groups. The Regional Consistency Group is focusing on these kind of regional, like what do we need to do to ensure that we are focusing on this issue, not just at a single jurisdiction by jurisdiction scale, but that we're planning together. And that group is co-chaired by John Coleman from the Bay Planning Coalition and Caitlin Sweeney from the San Francisco Estuary Partnership. Our local planning working group has been focusing on how can we support local adaptation planning in a way that's consistent and accessible to resource-constrained local jurisdictions. And BayCAN's very own Jack Leibster and Phoenix Armenta have been co-chairing that group. And then finally, we have a project implementation working group who's focused on really the project scale and expediting the delivery of high quality adaptation projects. And Jeremy Lowe from SFEI and Erica Powell from Charge have been co-chairing that group. And those groups have been really busy over the last 6 weeks or so. Each working group has met twice. There's about 20 to 30 members of each of those working groups, really representing all walks of resilience life. And they've begun to brainstorm potential actions, and some of those potential ideas we're looking forward to discussing with you in a breakout session that's going to follow this. So just before I close, I just wanted to extend the opportunity of a few ways to stay involved with BayAdapt. First, and probably most simply, go to our website, bayadapt.org, and sign up for updates. As David mentioned, we're really trying to think about how we can coordinate with BayCAN more and through this A-to-A process. So we're looking forward to that as kind of a crossing of our groups. And we will be hosting another public forum. Date still hasn't been announced, but it'll be early fall. And as always, just here's my email. We'd love to hear from you. So feel free to reach out with anything. So that's it for me. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Bruce now, unless anyone has any questions before we move on.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. We have time. We have a couple of minutes. Any questions before we get to the breakout groups for Jessica about BayAdapt? Okay, well, use the chat function. I see there's active use of the chat function. We're very happy about that. My 71-year-old brain can't do all of this and monitor the chat function, but David is monitoring, Sarah Church, our vice chair, is monitoring, and Yeshi. So please put your questions and comments there, and our team will be monitoring the chat function and moving us forward. And thank you, Jessica, and thanks for BayAdapt. So I'm going to share my screen now, if Jessica has stopped, and we are going to advance. So we're on to breakout 1. we're going to put you in breakout rooms, 8 of them. There'll be about 8 people in each room for 20 minutes for this first one. And here's the question that we want you to discuss amongst your group, and then come back. You'll see there are 5 possible answers here and 5 more on the next page. We've put all the answers and the question in the chat function, so you can see them when you're in your breakout rooms. But let me just go over what we're trying to get at here. This first one is, okay, so BayAdapt is working on a regional strategy or a regional program for sea level rise. And BayCAN's A to A group, as David talked about, is also approaching that issue of what do we need from a regional program that can help local sea level rise planning and action, because most of the planning, most of the projects are gonna need to be very local. So here are 5 things on page 1, and then we'll do the other 5 that you can pick from, and we want to hear your top 4, your 4 out of these 10. What should a regional sea level rise program do that would best help our region to move ahead? So number 1, just quickly to go through them. Develop a regional vision that would be voluntary guidance for local planning. 2 is providing technical assistance, data and science and modeling. 3 is convening stakeholders to exchange ideas, trade lessons learned, sound familiar, do group problem solving. 4 is about building a big public engagement campaign in the region to build support for local sea level rise action. 5, engage with and build the capacity of vulnerable communities and community-based organizations. Those are the first 5. And again, these are all going to be on the chat function so you can see them. You can make notes too as we go if you want. Quickly to run through. 6, a platform for collaboration. Could the regional program provide that kind of venue or space for different cities and counties to come together to work on solutions jointly? 7, and maybe similarly, how about facilitating the development of really large projects that go way beyond a county or a couple of counties that would serve the region? 8, permitting, streamlining and enhancing the permitting process that ties us up so much, and this would be applicable to all sea level rise projects. 9, we're almost done, work actively to integrate this kind of planning on sea level rise with planning like Plan Bay Area and other plans for housing and equity and economic development, and to integrate that kind of sea level rise planning with planning for other climate impacts like fire and drought. And finally, that this regional program could act like a regional funding entity, advocating for funding, going and securing funding from Sacramento or from DC, and then distributing that funding in various ways here to local sources. So that's 10. Again, they're all in the chat function. Your job is to talk them over for 20 minutes and be prepared to name your 4 that you think are the most important. They're all important. You know, we recognize that these are all parts of a good regional program, but what would really come to the top and make the most difference? What for your work locally? Or if you're not a local, pretend you're a local and think for the region or the city that you live in so that you can play the game. Again, 20 minutes, and then we'll come back together, and that's where we will do polling. We'll put these choices up and you'll get to vote, poll, and show us your 4. We'll look at the results and we'll talk about them with David and with Jessica. So let me drum roll here. Come on. Stop share and breakout rooms. And I'm going to open the rooms. You're self-facilitated. We did not assign facilitators. You have 20 minutes and we'll give you a countdown at the end. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, David and Jessica, comment here. We have a few minutes for kind of comments. What do you think? What do you see
Let
here?
me say two quick things. One, our group said we liked them all. It's hard to pick. They're all important and necessary, but we picked. It was interesting. Permitting came up a lot in our group, did not come up as much in the overall group. And of course, I find that convene stakeholders to learn and problem solve, low number, a little surprising since today we are convening stakeholders to learn and problem solve in large numbers, 60, 59, 60, 65 folks. Possibly that number could be low because it's already going on. Well, I don't know. I think some background on these answers is useful. But I think people in our group thought it was really, all of these things were really important, and it's tough to pick.
Yeah, and that's why this is a forced choice instead of saying they're all good, that we just wanted to see amongst 10 very good choices. Jessica, what do you see here?
Well, so the fact that the funding one came up as the top choice is not surprising to me. That always comes up as the top one. So that makes sense. One thing that did surprise me just in my group's conversation was really into facilitate development of very large scale projects. We talked a lot about that one, and it showed up pretty low in the overall. So I thought that was interesting. I think my group saw a lot of value in sort of helping actually move along some of these multi-jurisdictional projects. And we talked about what that could be and what that means. But I guess that didn't rise up to the group's highest priority.
Yeah. Sarah Church, our vice chair, or Yeshi Sauls, our project manager, comments here. What do you see on the voting?
Well, it's one thing we discussed quite a bit in our small group was interest in combining ideas or in focusing some ideas. So there may also be some additional data that we collected in small groups. Hopefully, if you have anything that wasn't collected and you want to weigh in on something creative like combining ideas, you can go ahead and put that in the chat.
Great. Yeah, very good use of the chat function here, because this is a pretty simple poll, and again, a forced choice to make you pick four, but a richer discussion. Put it in the chat function. Yeshi, any comments on this one, on what you see or what you saw in your group?
You know, I was actually going to say the same thing. We talked a lot about the fact that many of these are not mutually exclusive, and many of them would augment one another. And yeah, specifically that, yeah, regional collaboration being absolutely necessary, and we are doing that in BayCAN, but seeing the real value of using a regional plan like this to coordinate some of the other options here, and that maybe more is possible by realizing that they're not mutually exclusive.
Thank you. Okay.
There was also just a quick note, there was some discussion in our group that people weren't selecting items if they thought they were already covered in the region. So yeah. We're convening well, then maybe that wasn't selected for that reason. But
good. Well, look, this was just one kind of rough idea as to how to get some feedback here for Jessica and the Bay Adapt program, and David as he's leading the A to A working group. So we thank you for participating and playing the game. We're going to, again, put your comments in the chat function. We're going to move to the next item on the agenda. So Sarah, if you can stop sharing your screen. And I will start sharing mine, and I will give the mic in a minute to Yeshi. So hold on, Yesh. So my screen is back, and we're ready for our second big topic of the day. And I will turn the microphone to Yeshi Sauls.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Yeah, so moving into one of the next major things we wanted to focus on in this meeting, you know, as a network and as climate change professionals, we'd really be remiss not to acknowledge and ground our work in this moment and all that's happening in the world. And we've been doing that as a network, but wanting to specifically think today about how, you know, we've often framed climate change as one of the many compounding crises out there, but right now we're seeing this more than ever, from the pandemic to the oncoming economic crisis to the crisis of police brutality and anti-Black racism in our country. And we're seeing how these crises are interrelated and compound to impact the most marginalized and vulnerable in our communities, first and worst. And right now in this moment, there's an uprising for Black lives happening. And as climate professionals, we pose that we don't have to stand on the sidelines. And that's why we're bringing this topic today, that just posing that there actually is a lot that we can do as climate professionals to combat systemic inequity. And this is a conversation we've been having in the equity working group to parse out what that looks like on an operational level within the adaptation space. But we also just wanted to bring this conversation to the larger network as something we can all be thinking about, whether or not equity is our specialty or it's already embedded in our work. And so I'm not going to say more than that for now. That's just a little bit of framing of the discussion today. And Bruce is going to start us off with a video to just get us thinking about this topic, and then we'll circle back and pose some discussion questions to get us thinking more deeply about this. Bruce?
Thank you, Yesh.
The phrase, "I can't breathe," just means so much. There are people who are living in environments where they literally cannot breathe properly because of the air quality. We currently are living through a pandemic that's making it even harder for those same people to be able to literally breathe, and then also to be threatened by police officers and to be killed and not be.
Bruce, it's muted.
When you look at the data and you see where most of the environmental injustices are happening, you're going to find that it's mostly not happening in white communities. In some instances, it is, like fracking mountain communities.
Muted again.
Still muted.
Bruce, you might have to unmute yourself. Bruce.
Louis, Missouri, and I went to school in Orange.
Bruce, can you go back a little bit?
My major is environmental science, and unfortunately.
Are we having a trouble with the video?
I think every time you mute yourself, the video gets muted. So just mute yourself on and go back about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Each social media and tech assistance meeting starts in 10 minutes.
I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I went to school in Orange
On
County.
the calendar, each social media and tech assistance meeting starts in 10 minutes.
During that time, that's when there was a shooting of Michael Brown. He was an unarmed Black boy who was shot multiple times by a police officer, and that happened about 10 minutes from my house. It was really traumatizing. His body was laying in the street for 4 hours, and my sister participated in the protest, was tear gassed, her friends were tear gassed, things were burning to the ground, and then I had to go back to school, had to go back to California, but I couldn't really focus because my town back home was literally falling apart, and I was really coming to terms with my identity as a Black person in America. And when I was in my classes, I kept learning about protecting nature and how healing it could be, and I found it to be so healing for myself. I was in Southern California, in the mountains, going to the beach, but I just felt so bad for everyone back home that was literally drowning in the smoke of tear gas and fires. And that's when I really got interested in environmental justice, just wishing that people, like the people in the community of Ferguson, could have access to the same thing I had access to be able to find healing in nature and to have a safe environment. I was having a lot of feelings that I wasn't understanding because the conversations weren't going on about intersectional environmentalism. And when I would raise my hand and say, what about Flint? Or what about all these people that are living without access to healthy organic produce, what about them? It was silenced a lot of the time, or it just was considered like an add-on or something extra. When I was reading about advocating for public lands and all of these endangered species, I just kind of wish I would have had the courage to stand up and say, okay, there are all these endangered species, but Black people are also endangered in this country right now. And that's something that's equally as important. after witnessing everything that's been happening this week, I just felt like I really needed to say something and really wanted to encourage environmentalists that I've stood alongside in climate protests to stand alongside me and all the Black people in America right now. I wasn't hearing a lot about it from the environmental community and was kind of disappointed. So I made a post very specifically in this moment to say Black Lives Matter, because sometimes people seem a little hesitant to just say the word Black. And I was just trying my hardest to put on paper how I was feeling about the type of environmentalism that I want to see. And I want to see environmentalism that's inclusive of all people and environmentalism that stands for Black lives. I posted it. I thought I was going to get like fired and that people maybe weren't going to be super excited about it, but that definitely wasn't the case. And I was just really surprised and the best way to see so many environmentalists jump on board, so many companies and organizations that I really look up to share that message. And it seems like it's clicking with more people that if environmentalism isn't inclusive and intersectional, then it doesn't really stand for justice at all in the first place. Intersectional environmentalism is an inclusive version of environmentalism because it's looking at the degradation of both the planet and also the poor treatment of people and their relationship to the planet. And I think we need to focus on people because when you're talking about the climate crisis, the people who are currently facing the harshest impacts of climate change are people of color. A lot of the times I'm the only Black person in some of these environmental organizations, and I might be the only person that's raising awareness for it, and it's a lot easier for it to be silenced. But if more people in the environmental movement could be allies to these causes, I think it would be talked about even more. And I wish people would start doing that. It's not really about my post. I'm really happy that people are sharing it, but I just hope that people take the time to really learn about everything that's happening and just take the time to dive into the inequity. Everyone has a place in the environmental movement and in social justice movements. Not everybody is going to be the person that holds a megaphone, but you can also share content online that an environmental activist is posting, talk about it with your friends and family, and find a way to get involved because it really is going to take all of us to solve this.
All right. Thanks, Bruce, for showing that film. Can you share your slide again?
Yes, I will. Let me go back.
Yeah, so that we wanted to show that video just to ground us in some of the voices of folks trying to do this, what we're calling intersectional environmentalism. It's not different from what we've talked about in the past of centering equity in the climate work that we're doing. There's many ways to think about and frame this. But in this particular moment, and in this moment in history, it feels more important than ever for us to be asking very specific questions of ourselves as adaptation planners. And Bruce, if you could change the slide to the questions. Oh no, they're not on there. Okay, well they're in the, I guess they're in the discussion question
There they are.
document.
They're here now.
There they are. Okay, so basically, after watching that video, what we'd love us all to think about is just to really zoom out and ask of ourselves, how have we seen systemic racism play out in our work in the climate adaptation space? And with that, what can we do as adaptation planners to combat systemic racisms within our specific roles that we play, within the plans that we're making, within the communities that we're working with, and within ourselves and in interpersonal relationships in the workplace? So there's so many layers to how we can be addressing this. And again, this is definitely a conversation we have been having at the Equity Working Group, but it's a conversation we can all have right now and continue to have with our colleagues. And so we're gonna go into breakout groups, and these are the two questions we would like you to think about. I would ask if you're a member of the Equity Working Group and you have any takeaways from the ways we've concretely talked about what this looks like in the adaptation space. We've been doing this work. Feel free to share in the breakout, but again, we can all be thinking about this, and the folks in the work group don't know necessarily more than any of us do. So we can all have a collaborative discussion and explore these topics. So with that, again, this will be self-guided discussion. You won't have a facilitator, so you can facilitate yourself, and let's go into breakouts.
Good, and we'll see you in 20 minutes. Yes, David?
And a report out from a designated person to read. I'm looking at the agenda. Is there report outs we're going to do at the end?
No required report out. We want to hear some highlights from discussions, but not required that every group. It's mainly to get you thinking in your group. Yes, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And we will be coming back and sharing some of our takeaways. Yes. And also in those moments or in the breakout would invite folks that were at the most recent equitable adaptation training to share any takeaways that might overlap with these questions.
So starting the breakouts now, we'll see you in 20 minutes. Yeshi, shall we put the questions back on the screen or just leave the faces?
I think we should leave the faces.
Yes.
After we get back from breakouts, it's this kind of sneaky thing where everybody's still on video, so we can still see each other before everyone goes anonymous again. But yeah, so welcome back, everybody. Thanks for participating in those discussions. I know our group had a really amazing one and some really, really good thinking. So I would just love to use the rest of this time to hear any key takeaways, any really good thoughts, any new thoughts. That would be what I would want to know. Did anyone have any like little brain blasts or, oh, I hadn't thought about that before? So want to open it up. I also want to acknowledge and thank Paloma for naming the fact that, yeah, we have Carl Anthony among us who is blind and has been struggling with some of the access, and a really key part of doing this work equitably is making sure things are accessible. And so I want to apologize for maybe not having as accessible of systems in this call, and really commit to having our future calls be more accessible. And also please let us know if there's anything we can do in the remainder of the call to make this call more accessible to anyone here. So just wanted to name that first off.
Excellent.
And then open up.
We have 10 minutes, yes.
Great, 10 minutes. Yeah. Any reflections? Any new thoughts? Great ideas?
I mean, it's hard to say if the thoughts are new because everybody's kind of has a different level of experience. But I think that what was awesome about the discussion we had is that people were all grappling with like whatever their learning edge was together, which I think is what we have to do. And I think one really key piece is that we're not all operating from the same context and information. And so it's absolutely life-changing to understand the underpinnings of inequities and how and government's part in creating those inequities so that we can really be thoughtful about how to shift those dynamics. So that was one of many interesting pieces. For example, redlining, loans offered to whites, not to people of color, a whole variety of privileges and benefits that were really directed towards whites and have, built up this really large differential over many years.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Really good points.
I think on that, this is Sharon with Alameda. I think on Hannah's point, and a thing I've been challenged with in kind of other areas is in being able to invite the community to participate. And sometimes that's kind of hard. Communication is challenging. I've started to look for the natural leaders in communities because they touch a lot of people. But the other thing is about disparity is, creating opportunity for learning and then being able to invite someone to participate. So if you don't know anything about the subject, it's hard to want to participate because you just feel like you're just not smart or something. Can you imagine somebody coming into a group like this with no background? It would feel very intimidating. But if you create an opportunity in a community, in a safe space to have learning, and then you can invite to participate, I think that there would be better results. But I can tell you, finding the natural leaders to help you make the invitation is one of the other challenges I've found.
From your calendar, prom at 11:30 Siege starts in 10 minutes.
I actually think to that point about it being intimidating.
From your calendar, Tom at 11:30 siege. Starts
You,
in 10 minutes.
one of the things we've been doing is actually going into communities, to their groups and their spaces, and making these presentations and trying to communicate, leave a lot of time for questions and conversation so that we can build the capacity and people feel safe in their own spaces because they're surrounded by their own advisory board members or their own community members or their own HOA members. And going into people's spaces, I have had the best conversations. You can't replicate it. You just can't. Community events and community groups are, I think, some of the best places to have these engagements because you don't feel intimidated. You're not entering a space that's somebody else's space. You're in your own space.
To all these points, I wonder if anyone from my group would want to share on, we had a really rich discussion on what it means to shift the paradigm from asking the community to participate to actually shifting power to the community to begin with from the start of the process. And I'm wondering if anyone from our group would want to speak a little bit to that conversation that we had. Or if you were at the equitable adaptation training and wanted to speak to that's what we talked about in the training as well. But Jackie, I saw you were about to talk.
Sure, yeah. One of the things that Yeshi highlighted and we talked about a bit was who has expertise. And we often come in with, we are the experts, here is the problem and here is the project that we are proposing to solve that problem. And how do we reframe that to recognize the expertise that exists within the community to even define the problems before we get to proposing solutions?
Absolutely. I'm wondering, I wish the chat wasn't disabled. Bruce, I don't know if you can fix that function, but I know people might be participating that way if they had the ability to. And so maybe that function can be re-enabled. But yeah, and another thing we talked about in our group is just how we have this conversation of the binary between government and community. And we're talking about this all the time and often are not apt to actually talk about the racial underpinnings of that dynamic. And that so often what we mean by government is large institutions made up of white people. And what we mean by community, when we're saying community engagement, is specifically frontline communities of color that are going to be most impacted by climate change. And that to talk about combating systems of racism and inequity in our work means to actually challenging the ways in which white supremacy culture exists at the foundation of a lot of government systems. And to not gloss over the racial dynamics of everything we're talking about when we're talking about community-driven planning.
I would like to add that I think a thing that kind of a dialogue that came up in our group was we talked about that, land use planning by and large tends to emphasize the more affluent members of the community, usually white, have more capacity to participate. The COVID crisis is going to dramatically reduce the capacity of local governments for their budgets to be involved in planning at all levels, including community engagement. However, Maureen Parton from Marin County indicated that with the COVID crisis, she's seen an increase in participation in Board of Supervisor meetings from people from disadvantaged communities and Gen Xers and others. We talked about the possibility of technology to be able to be a partial bridge to help deal with that, and the fact that many of us have in the past benefited from Civic Spark Fellows that are supporting our efforts. And there's probably about 20 or 25 of them that will be assigned to the Bay Area in the coming year. And one of the things we might want to ask Civic Spark Fellows is to look and research what's the best ideas around the country where communities are taking advantage of kind of the challenge of COVID to come up with technological solutions to reach out and engage and empower and allow citizens and communities to be involved in community dialogues and decisions. And there's kind of an overlap there in which a large amount of COVID response understandably is being focused in communities of color and disadvantaged communities where the problem is the greatest. And maybe there's a bridge between what the health workers are doing to do outreach and contact tracing and stuff in disadvantaged communities that can provide a translation into evolution, into how to take those lessons learned and networks and such into using technology in the short run to try to engage and empower and inform and empower and engage communities of color in a bridge period until such time as the COVID crisis goes away, to where we can actually engage and face the kind of the face-to-face direct in the community meetings that Lindy Lowe was talking about, which is ultimately where I think we all know we want to be.
Thanks, Warner. Yeah, absolutely. So we have time for probably one more comment, and then we got to move on. And I see that Alex Morrison wrote something in the chat, but I'm wondering, Alex, if you just wanted to say your piece, or if you prefer to just chat, that's fine too. But would love to hear your voice if you care to share.
Yeah, this is Carl. I want to make one other pitch here. I think there's a role for the public education. I think there's a role for getting some of our schools to organize, to focus the attention of students on the Bay Area and on the process that's going on, so that even from kindergarten all the way up to K through 12, there's a real opportunity to build, again, capacity of our communities to pay attention to these issues.
Thank you so much, Carl. Yes. So that sort of wraps up our conversation. I'm really glad we got to hear from Carl as our last comment. That feels so fundamental to this work. And it seems like people are still putting really important thoughts into the chat, and we can continue this conversation. So really grateful for you all for diving into this topic with us. There's a lot more to share. There's a lot more work to be done within our network and within our region. And this is, you know, we're just continuing the work, continuing the conversation as we go. And to finish us off, I just wanted to put this, well, thank you, Bruce, put this slide up. It's the Intersectional Environmentalist Pledge that Leah Thomas wrote, that she included in the video that we showed, which is her way of creating an offering for environmentalists and climate professionals to consider what types of commitments they can make in their work towards embedding racial equity and anti-racist work into their environmentalism. So we invite you to take a look at this, maybe take a screenshot. We don't have time to go over all of them, but really just as a way to get us thinking about what types of commitments we can make in our work. And you'll be hearing more from us on this front in the future.
Thank you, Yashi, and thank you, everyone. Turn it back to David now, who's going to take us on to our next item on the agenda, BayCAN Year 3, which we're starting.
Hey there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about budget stuff and membership renewals. You all got an email several weeks ago outlining our process. We do have a lot of work to do. We have a goal of continuing to do the work within BayCAN at the levels at which we have been doing for the first 2 years of our existence, if not expanding that level. And to do that, of course, we're dependent, at least in part, on a budget process that brings in membership fees from all of the entities who participate. These are somewhat tough times, we know, for local governments in particular, which is where the bulk of our revenues come from. And we've had some members who have said that they cannot renew this year because of the fiscal impacts of COVID, and we understand, though we're sad to see them go. For the most part, folks have been renewing, however, particularly those who've been active with BayCAN, and we really want that to continue, of course. Our budget, we've been exactly on budget. I think fiscal management within BayCAN has been extremely solid. Most of this stuff comes up in detail at the steering committee level, of course, but I will say that we had a budget for FY 2020 of $76,100. and we spent $76,500. So we were a 0.6% divergence from budget. So we're managing against our budget extremely well. And our revenue last year was solid. We brought in $82,000 total, again, all from members using our sliding scale. What we need to do next year is, or this year that we're in right now, is renew as many folks as possible. And as I said, the renewals are coming in. I haven't seen the most up-to-date list, but we're in quite good shape, building toward a renewal process that really we think is going to go through the next few weeks. We've said, and I said in an email that Sarah and I sent out early on, that we're not seeking renewals by July 1 for participation. That's obvious in terms of the participation we have and the great participation we have in this group today. We're just asking folks to communicate with us. If for any reason it looks bad for renewal, we'd like to know. If it looks good for renewal, but it's going to take a little time, that also would be good to know. We're not looking to boot people out of the BayCAN process who can't renew as promptly as possible. At some point, we'll have to make that call, and we'll probably have to continue to make BayCAN activities, including all of the important stuff that you've heard about today and others, accessible to those who are members. I should say community-based organizations are free members under the bylaws that we adopted when we got BayCAN started. So what we're needing is for everyone who is not renewed yet to please zero in on the invoice that you should have gotten as the lead person. Not everyone on this call is the lead person for your agency, but please check with the lead person with your agency. If you don't know who that is, feel free to write Bruce or I or Yeshi, and we can tell you. And stay on top of the invoice, move it through your process, et cetera, and let us know if there are any issues that we need to know about. We just need, I think we're going to be in great shape for continuing our work at the level that we have had it in the last year, but we do need everyone to come through with membership in the coming weeks for that to work well. As I said, we want to maintain our existing program, which is significantly consists of Bruce and Yeshi doing the work to convene and move the ball on all the issues that we're focused on. We don't have a food budget for next year, so that'll help. And the budget is not adopted yet for next year. We're working on that, and we'll work on that with the steering committee at their next meeting. But as I said, we want it to be about the same level as it was last year. The work that we're going to do, that we're doing this year, 8A working group, getting off the ground, as you heard, equity work group, passing its first year, going into its second year, made huge amounts of progress, I think, helping to really elevate the conversation in the Bay Area as a whole. We've got our 2 regional meetings. This is one. We'll have another early next year. 2 sub-regional meetings. We're going to have those. That's in the North Bay, South Bay, and Central Bay in each of 2 seasons. We're planning 8 webinars through the year. The newsletter that Yeshi puts together is very informative. And the personal consultations that Bruce does with all members are available at any time, part of your membership, which people I think have found extremely useful for building the connections and interconnectivity that BayCAN is really all about. Are part of this. I think what I'd add to that are, increasing connectivity to regional processes, particularly BayAdapt. We're having a voice in that process, which is something we asked for, and BCDC is responding by hearing that voice. We want to continue to do that. And then as the adaptation world advances, continuing the connection to the Alliance of Regional Collaborators for Climate Adaptation, or ARCA, of which BayCAN is one member, is extremely important. We can learn a lot. They're actually doing a lot related to equity. They're doing a lot related to A2A. Those connections between what's happening throughout the state and what we're working on in the Bay Area are extremely important. And lastly, I think that at some point this year, we should be thinking about where we want to expand our program next year. We've started, what I like is that we're building organically and within the lean and mean budget that we have. But I think we can always do more and identify additional areas where we may want to launch another work group, do another initiative, possibly convene some additional meetings that are broader than the membership of BayCAN. Whatever we decide we can do, we will be able to do if we have the resources. So that's my pitch for renewals. Please communicate with me or Bruce or Yeshi if you have any questions or thoughts, and we'll continue apace with this work.
Great, thanks, David. And again, if you have any questions or comments about what we're planning, as you can see here on the screen, or what you'd like to see us plan for year 3, put it in the chat function. Our answer for everything today. And we've got the chat function enabled again. Okay, last but not least item on the agenda. We're not going to do this as a breakout. I think we've done 2 good breakouts, and we wanted to give you, with those small groups, a chance to meet and greet other people and share in a smaller group. But I think we'll keep this one right here, and we'll pull up everybody on the screen in just a second. This is where we want to hear one cool thing that you're doing right now or you're planning to do in the next few months. This is always a really valuable part of any of our meetings. We're going to start with heat. And if you're doing something, your organization, for preparing for what could be a hot summer here, it certainly has been a hot summer in Siberia, where you might have noticed a few weeks ago, they hit 100 degrees in a Siberian town in Russia. The Southwest in our country has been setting heat records for the last 10 days, both in Southern California, then into Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. It's forecast by NOAA to be an above average summer for heat. So we'll see for the Bay Area, but we know some of you are making some preparations for that. So we'd first like to hear from anybody doing something cool about heat. And we're going to start with Sarah Church at Alameda County. And then after we're done with the heat people, something else cool that you're doing. So let me stop sharing so we can see everyone again. Hello. And let's start with Sarah Church with Alameda County. What's one cool thing that you all are doing around preparing for heat waves?
Great, thanks. So we have engaged with some of our planning and public health colleagues, some of whom are on this call, to revisit. We did a project over the last couple of years to put together heat and health guides for the community and translate them into 6 languages. And we know that some of that guidance needs to be revisited alongside the guidance for smoke and power shutoff, because the instructions, some of them are different under COVID, or we need to add caveats. So for example, check on your neighbor. We just want to add some caveats about safety under COVID when you do so. So we are going to revisit that guidance and then work to move it up the chain in our departmental operations center and emergency operations center, because many of you are probably also deployed. So there are different kind of chains of command. And we're also, we're going to be compiling good ideas on cooling centers to share up through that same chain of command from other sustainability and planning partners, such as through Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and then share those so that the cities, through the proper channels again, so that cities have good guidance on how to make sure that cooling centers are safe under COVID conditions.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Alameda County. Love your background, actually. Nice sunny day always. Who's got something else on preparing for heat this summer or this fall? Is everybody banking on it being foggy? I don't think so. You know, fog, just to say, there's a lot of research going on now around fog on the California coast and in our region. There's been conflicting research over the last decade about whether we have more fog or less fog, or whether we're going to have more fog or less fog going forward. But most of the research is leaning towards, and certainly all the anecdotal info is about, we've had much less fog over the last 30 years, kind of gradually decreasing in the Bay Area. Who's got something on heat?
Bruce, I'll share, Bruce. And then Hannah, Hannah, you're getting ready to talk?
Marcus, you're on. Go ahead.
Okay, great. And Hannah, you can add to it, but Hannah is working with our health department and our energy and water group to advance some of our heat work. And it looks like you're on. Hannah, do you want to share that?
Good, great.
Sure. Thanks, Marcus. So we have a heat task force of Climate Ready that includes health and folks focused on energy and water. Kim is here, Kim Springer. And we're also working with external partners like Peninsula Clean Energy and El Concilio and other community-based organizations. So there's kind of a variety of areas that we're trying to touch on. But it's difficult, you know, with the COVID environment and all the other priorities, and also like the different sort of, I guess I would say, like jurisdiction over different aspects of heat makes progress a little bit slow. But we are, you know, we're hearing from community members their concerns about heat, lack of cooling centers. So there are a number of areas that we need to work on. Marcus, do you want to add pieces?
Just one piece is the state legislative advocacy around CPUC, and we're in a climate zone in San Mateo County that doesn't give us, our low-income communities, access to air conditioning units. So unfortunately, that means a lot of our low-income communities, we've already surpassed that threshold many years ago. So we're left without funding for those communities to implement air conditioning, which is especially important now without access to community centers.
You know, if any of you have used CalAdapt, you've seen the extreme heat charts that you can make. And if you haven't used CalAdapt for that, I would highly recommend it. You can go to caladapt.org and fill in your locale and get graphs, charts showing the number of extreme heat days projected for your area specifically under low and medium and high emission scenarios over the next, you can look at it for mid-century and also for end of century. And it's very instructive because I found, and maybe you have too, in talking to people about heat, average temperatures don't mean much, you know, to people. And average temperatures in the Bay Area and in California are going up, but it's those extreme days and the number of extreme days that are the health problem, and extreme nights. You know, we just had in Arizona record high low temperatures at night in the last week or two down there, where it was in the low 90s as a low temperature for the nighttime hours. That's not going to happen here tomorrow, but that's the biggest health problem is that you can't cool off at night, and then you go into another hot day following. That's one of the big health and heat problems. Another person with something on heat and preparation here.
This is Sharon with the City of Alameda. So we, with a group, in fact, I see one of my people that was on my team, we're going to have to make an adjustment for COVID. So we did do some planning for cooling centers. We have one identified, which has been a real challenge with COVID, but we created an environmental emergency plan that I'm going to have to add COVID to. And it addressed hot, cold, and bad air, smoky air. But around heat in particular now, Alameda is rarely that hot. But we use the NOAA Heat Risk Index because it compiles number of days, whether or not the temperature cools down overnight, and some things like that to get a heat risk. So we've used that as our trigger for whether or not we would want to open cooling centers and into the evening, because one hot, like you said, in Arizona, when you have multiple days and it doesn't cool off overnight is when you start having the problem. So we chose to use NOAA's Heat Risk Index as our trigger.
Good. You know, one of the things connected with cooling centers that we've seen in the literature is the importance then of providing transportation for people who can't get themselves easily to a cooling center. If they're only for people that have cars and can drive, that's a problem. So transportation combined with cooling centers is certainly a much bigger strategy. Who's got something else? Thank you for these on heat, or even an idea that you're thinking about on heat preparation.
I think we just need more decentralized approaches because so many people can't leave their dwellings.
Yeah.
So we really have to help people where they are.
Yeah, you know, eventually we're going to need in hotter areas of this region and in California generally, we're going to, for health reasons, need more air conditioning. And air conditioning, as you know, if it's just burning fossil fuels from the power plant, is a drag then on GHGs. But putting health first, air conditioning, as we know, makes a huge difference for whether you're going to do well or not well in a heat emergency. And again, especially in our hotter areas of this region. So that's why the folks that are working, I know at LBNL, they're working a lot on what's the energy efficient or the green air conditioning for the future, where we can cool people off and we can protect health, but we can do it in a way that's not burning fossil fuels and putting us backwards there. Who's got something else on heat? Or we'll open it up. We've got a few more minutes. Something cool that you're doing that you'd love to share with the group. Any topic.
Hi, this is Dorette. I wanted to say earlier in the year, we had some conversations with some folks from New York City and Stanford about heat and looking at buildings, particularly as not equal access or exposure to heat, that really looking at a whole building, and that some of the folks on the top floors or certain sides of the building may be more in need of air conditioning as a higher priority, or some kind of adaptive remediation of the building itself. So that's just something I wanted to add in, was like a lot of times people are looking at community or a block or streetscapes, but they're not looking at the building itself as to who within the building is most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And there's so many buildings that need to be retrofitted to adapt to heat across the cities in the Bay Area, because there's so much older housing stock in some of the cities. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think Contra Costa County right now is come up with a plan that they're actually looking for some financial resources for, to follow up on a pilot they did a year or two ago, having their public health nurses doing some, I guess you could say, reconnaissance and screening with their existing patients to see in their homes, they do home visits, whether they had adequate heating, cooling systems, insulation, and things like that, windows that could be opened while they were out doing their home visits, and then making referrals to LIHEAP and LIHEAP. And
yes.
So making those kind of connections through existing home visitors is really powerful. And now they're trying to do it with folks who have been diagnosed with asthma to scale it up.
Excellent. Yes, that's Contra Costa is a good example, Dorette, with that program where, public health departments in counties are often doing the most to get out into homes for various health issues. And so Contra Costa did this program that Dorette's referring to, where they did a couple of things at once when they were there, and they looked at energy efficiency. They looked at things to cool the house, all of that. And that's, again, we're going to have to take a more holistic approach here, and not just a little program here, another little one here, another little one here. Who's got something else to share on heat or on any topic? Wildfire, drought, any of our hot topics? Who's got something cool?
I think kind of going off of what Dorette was mentioning with support for retrofitting buildings and whatnot, window ACs and even the little R2D2 size portable ACs are something where in large apartment buildings, if it's possible to say identify and support individuals who are more heat sensitive, elderly folks or people with disabilities or otherwise, on the wrong side of the building, whatever it might be. One safe air-conditioned room might be more affordable to do those upgrades than, retrofitting a whole apartment building's HVAC system.
Smart. Yeah, we're going to have, we all know the budget issues that we're having. We have big heat waves this summer or this fall in this region and elsewhere. And it's going to, again, be one of those kind of wilderness training things where it's not the first thing or the second thing that gets you that goes wrong. It's the third or the fourth. And with the budget issues that you're all having, this is going to be interesting to see how we can react and respond efficiently for heat waves this summer, to fires this summer and fall. One of the big things in the research on heat has always been the low-tech version of identifying in your communities who the most vulnerable individuals are. The classic study from Chicago and their heat wave in the mid-90s that showed it was mainly elderly males who lived alone and males of color who lived alone and weren't having someone check in on them. Those isolated individuals were the ones who had the most trouble in terms of heat stroke and beyond for heat waves. It wasn't families kind of crammed 8 people into a 2-room apartment, but those strategies then that are kind of low tech to identify those people so that you can check in on them, so that you can bring kind of services and things to them when things happen. Got time for one more. Who's got something cool to give us on a Wednesday?
Let me just quickly talk about something that our fire folks are doing. One thing, we formed a new fire GPA so that all the fire districts within the county are working together now. And we have a small FEMA grant to take LiDAR that was recently flown over the entire county, and the fire folks are going to be interpreting that LiDAR to identify on a synoptic way where there are problems with a lack of distancing or social distancing of vegetation, safe distancing, and also the characteristics of the roof material and the siding material to identify where those potential risks are. And so that'll be a great piece of information that we have. And then just one thought to leave people with, is anybody looking into what the potential impacts will be of everybody buying their own generators and running them on diesel when the power shutoffs happen? I mean, we got air pollution from the burning forest, and then we got air pollution from everybody running their diesels. And is there a solar battery alternative to that?
The disability community was working to distribute the Yeti 3000 3 kilowatt hour, I think it is. And that was mainly for folks that had like ventilators and CPAPs and other things where if it shuts off after, for more than a little bit, you're gone. But even those, $5,000 battery packs plus a small solar charger that might get you through a few days if you're very careful about managing that. So there are battery storage systems. They're just hard to come by and expensive, and you'd have to pair them, and you'd have to set up a home for islanding.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Yeah, unfortunately, we had the big 5-year drought in Northern California and in California just a little while back. We're probably dipping, or we are dipping technically back into one. And after that drought, we had a lot of work, and during that drought, done by water agencies and the state DWR and others. It became a real topic. I know in going to Sacramento to talk to legislators at that time about climate adaptation, they would kind of look at you a little blank. This was a while back. But if you mentioned drought, they went, oh, good, we know drought. We understand what drought is. Now we know what you're talking about. And then the same thing happened with fires. We had these record-setting fires 2 years in a row here and in Southern California. And we're spending a lot of time now, and for good reason, at the state level and locally on fires. We have yet to see that kind of big impact event for heat in recent years. We've had some heat waves. When was 2017 was, I think, the last in the Bay Area that lasted a couple of days that was quite hot. But we haven't had that similar big event to get everyone's attention. Unfortunately, it's probably going to take that to get more attention for heat strategies that we can implement locally and at the state level. Okay, David, I'll turn it back to you and wrap it up for us and send us home.
Thanks, Bruce. So I want to thank Bruce and Yeshi for all of the work done to prepare for this meeting. I want to thank Jessica Fain from BCDC for engaging with us quite a bit in advance of this meeting and then seeking and getting the feedback as just one step in a lengthy BayAdapt process. And thank everybody for participating today. We had great turnout for the Zoom meeting. I think the breakouts went well. We're doing the collaboration. We're exploring the issues. We're learning from one another and from, developing good and best practices. But keep thinking about what you want to see BayCAN do in terms of the things we're already doing, in terms of the things that should be done in addition to what we're already doing. We're only limited by our imagination, our intelligence, and our engagement with one another, and to a lesser extent by our finances. So please also ensure that your agency renews your membership. I'm smiling. You can't see me, but I'm smiling as I say that. So, let's keep on with this work, and please continue to participate in your work groups, and the door is always open for next steps and improvements. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good and safe time. This is an extraordinary time we are living in. So be careful, be safe, keep doing the great work you're doing, and we will have email information to you and through the newsletter soon about our webinar in August and our next set of get-togethers. Thank you for your time today. Keep up the great work. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.